Hello everybody, and how are you doing? I hope you're doing well. I'm here, and that is a major because we had a power cut this afternoon, right before I was about to be part of a Zoom meeting. In fact, right before I was meant to be helping host a Zoom meeting. So there was half an hour of frantic running around trying to find laptops and remembering if the microphone would work with it, and remembering where the nearest public Wi-Fi access was likely to actually have a power supply, such as the library in town. Usually if we get a power cut out where we are, they don't get a power cut. So lots of extra adrenaline going on earlier this afternoon. Not my favourite thing. So anyway, that's how it is. The power came back on right before I was about to go and get in the car. I was just gathering up my bits and pieces, and it was wonderful. And the Zoom meeting went okay, except I had to restart the computer beforehand and also reset all the audio settings for the basic audio handler that I use on my computer. Mainly because of the fact that I do streaming as well, but it means that everything audio goes through it, and that needed resetting because apparently it had updated itself and didn't remember all the update and the information to do the update. So there you go. Too much information, but what do you come here for? Too much information. Anyway, so what are we doing? Emily is back on speaking terms with Lofty Johns. That's good. The bush is not going to be cut down. There's various other things going to be likely to happen in the next little while in the book. We've had Christmas. I can't remember if that was last time or the time before. And this chapter today, that we start off with today, is called, in quotation marks, romantic but not comfortable. So, intriguing. Sorry, I was just having a wee snack because I didn't have any lunch. And it was a seedy sort of a thing, and now it's all around my mouth. And irritating. Try and get it sorted without actually pulling faces in front of you. Anyway, so here you go. If you're new here, I better introduce myself. Hi, I'm Jev. I live in New Zealand and I read old-fashioned children's stories because that's what I grew up with. They were lots of fun, and we're losing them. We're losing lots and lots of stories just because people don't know of them. Libraries tend to only keep newer books. If you unless something is designated a classic, which a lot of these ones could well be classics but are not, because there's only a certain number of classics apparently you're allowed to have. Unless something is brand new or within the last 3 years, basically your local library is not required to keep it, and so all of these things have been lost from public accessibility unless you download them, because they're now in public domain, a lot of them, via somewhere like Project Gutenberg, which is gutenberg.org, and I'm going to type that into the chat for you so you can see it. No, not quite. That was weird. That was a strange bit of spelling there that I put in the first time. I'll try that. Anyway, so they specialise in making available to everyone, free of charge, books that are in the public domain. Some of them are textbooks, some of them are various other non-fiction books. There are also novels and various other works of fiction, including children's fiction. They do have a classification system for finding things. It's a little bit daunting when you're first looking. Don't expect everything that you go looking for to be available there, because it is based in the States and it is using their copyright system in terms of what is decided that it is available into public domain or not, because copyright law is different in different countries. Anyway, the majority of the books that I read are technically in public domain. Not all of them have been hosted on Project Gutenberg, because some of them are unknown to the majority of people. So there you go. And until somebody provides them with a copy, They don't actually have a copy. So, once again, information for the new visitors. I have 3 suggestions. Make sure you have something to drink, something to eat. They don't have to be the same as mine. And somewhere comfortable to sit. I just realised I could actually show you something as a reminder. You need somewhere comfortable to sit. Something to drink. Water is always a great idea. It keeps your brain working well and your body. It's good to stay hydrated. Also, I have with me my homemade iced coffee, which is basically a double shot of coffee from the coffee machine, topped up with cold milk from the fridge. No sugar, no nothing else. Very yummy. So I've got my 2 drinks. I have my New Zealand snack log, which is like a granola or muesli bar. Actually, muesli bar rather than granola because I don't think they're cooked. I've also got some pre-sliced cheese just for the fun of it. And no, we're not turning green today. We are not seeing the cheese as a green screen, which often it does. I have no idea why. I've possibly got my settings slightly different again, so therefore it's not seeing the cheese as being green, even when very obviously it isn't, and it never has been when I've been eating it on here. So something to drink, something to eat, and somewhere comfortable to sit. So I'm sitting on my office chair, my second office chair, just because this one doesn't poke up too high at the back and interfere with what we're looking at and look a bit weird. And yes, in case you're wondering, I do have ADHD and I'm easily distracted, and I'm also on the autism spectrum, and currently I've got the itchies for no apparent reason. No, I have not been playing with the cat. Our cat has very, very fine, fluffy hair which can waft around you and make you feel all itchy and ticklish because it's so fine and you don't even realise it's there. I can hear him. He's got a little bell on his collar. He's a very good hunter and we don't really want him catching birds. Sorry, itchy nose. We don't really want him catching birds, so he has a bell on his collar and he also has to stay in at night because most birds are easier to catch first thing in the morning and last thing at night when it's change of light. They go into bed, but the cat has the ability to see really well, as cats do. And so often that is when cats will catch birds, is right on the edge of the evening. And so he's meant to stay inside at that time of night. One of the reasons why is so he doesn't catch birds. And also because they can see well at night, but their depth perception isn't quite as good for things that are moving fast and are large, such as traffic. And we have a busy road next to us. And, sorry, once again, honestly, it feels like there's a little bit of fluff. Oh, there is. It's on my glasses. That's why. It was an eyelash. That was tickling me. Nice to know it wasn't just in my imagination. Yes, so cats often, not always, but when cats get hit by cars, it's usually at night, and it's because their perception of the speed of a vehicle is not native. It's not something that's built into them. It's something that they have learned, and their awareness of speed and distance and everything isn't as good at night as what it would be during the daytime. They don't tend to get hit during the day. They tend to get hit at night. So we want to keep the cat alive. We keep him inside at night. Anyway, way too much information. But apart from stories, what else do you come here for? So, before we get started on the actual story, yes, I will be looking across from time to time to my other monitor because I do my own moderating a lot of the time. I am today, as far as I know, because both my normal mods are actually watching another friend who streams at the same time on a Friday afternoon, and he's been streaming for a lot longer than me. That's actually how I got to know one of them anyway, was just through what he's doing. Disabled streamer. And why am I telling you that? So yes, I've got some moderators tools over on my other monitor just to keep an eye on things in case I need to. I'm sure there's some more stuff I was going to tell you. Yes, I interrupt myself often when I'm reading. I'm happy to chat with you in the chat stream. I tend not to get involved with chat when I'm actually reading a chapter, but between chapters and at the beginning and the end of a stream session, I'll quite happily chat with people who are in the chat. If I am talking about something and you think, oh, that's interesting, I want to find out more about it, you are most welcome to, and even to share the information that you have found out in our chat. And if it's appropriate and if I happen to see it in time, I will read it out. So those who are watching this not live, but are watching this over on YouTube, because I save the recordings and put them up in 2 weeks' time over there, then they can actually see what it's about, because when you get the recordings over on YouTube, I have trimmed it to this little box that I'm very poorly drawing around me here. So it's just this piece of picture here without any of the overlay that's beyond that, so that it's relevant for them, because overlays aren't really a YouTube thing, they're a Twitch thing. So if you are watching this on Twitch live and you want to catch up on some stories that you've missed out on previously, such as the Millie Molly Mandy stories, lovely, very, very simple stories for about a little girl living in a village in England before the Second World War. Maybe even before the First World War, I can't remember actually, it's so long ago that I read them. And also ones like The Secret Garden or The Treasure Seekers, any of the other books that I have, yes, me repeating myself, any of the other books that I've read before, then I am going to give you a link for that. And yes, that is my keyboard that's banging away in your ears. So that's the link for my YouTube channel. If you are watching this on Twitch and you want to open that in another tab, I'd suggest you don't go away just yet. We're actually going to start reading the story here soon. But you can catch up on some other things over there. Everything turns up there about 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks at the moment, because I think I actually missed a little bit. And if you're watching this on YouTube and you want to be part of the fun and be able to chat with me and contribute to the conversation, then on my channel on YouTube, there is a link for my Twitch channel. Twitch. Look for a link that says Twitch and follow that over to my Twitch channel and join Twitch. It's free. And follow me. And if you follow me, then the service will notify you when, excuse me a minute. And I'm back. Sorry about that. I thought someone had walked into the room with their phone on with music playing really loud. It wasn't. It was a car going down the road and the sound was coming through the chimney that's next to me. Right. So I was saying, oh yes, if you're over on YouTube, then come across to my Twitch channel, join Twitch, follow me, and then the service will notify you when I go live, and then you'll be able to get involved with the chat over here. I also have a Discord server, which nobody ever does anything on, even me, but if you get involved with that and want to talk a little bit more about stories, especially children's stories, that's my preference because that's what I read, you can do so. I do from time to time when it's appropriate. If a book has illustrations, I will actually share the illustrations over there on our Discord server. So there you go. I think that's enough chatting for now. How about we get on with reading the story, since that's what we all came here for. Although I think some of you come here just for the laughs. Anyway, here we go. We are reading Emily of New Moon by L.M. Montgomery, and we are reading Chapter 21, Romantic but Not Comfortable. Interesting. A certain thing happened at New Moon because Teddy Kent paid Ilse Burnley a compliment one day and Emily Starr didn't altogether like it. Ooh, jealousy maybe. Empires have been overturned for the same reason. Teddy was skating on Blairwater and taking Ilse and Emily out in turns for slides. It's winter time over there. There is a big pond lake type thing called Blairwater, and so because it's on Prince Edward Island and it's winter time, it gets cold enough to actually have the water freeze and turn to ice, which is why they're skating out on Blairwater. He was taking Ilse and Emily out in turns for slides. Neither Ilse nor Emily had skates. Nobody was sufficiently interested in Ilse to buy skates for her, and as for Emily, Aunt Elizabeth did not approve of girls skating. New Moon girls had never skated. Aunt Laura had a revolutionary idea that skating would be good exercise for Emily and would, moreover, prevent her from wearing out the soles of her boots sliding. Aunt Laura's a little bit of a stirrer in a very quiet way, but neither of these arguments was sufficient to convince Aunt Elizabeth, in spite of the thrifty streak that came to her from the Burnleys. The latter, however, caused her to issue an edict that Emily was not to slide. Emily took this very hardly. She moped about in a woebegone fashion, and she wrote to her father, who is dead, and she still writes him letters just as a way of just decompressing and getting things out of her system. She wrote to her father, "I hate Aunt Elizabeth. She is so unjust. She never plays fair." But one day Dr. Burnley stuck his head in at the door of the New Moon kitchen and said gruffly, "What's this I hear about you not letting Emily slide, Elizabeth?" "She wears out the soles of her boots," said Elizabeth. "Boots be..." The doctor remembered the ladies were present just in time. The doctor has a lot less boundaries than the ladies do. In fact, he's quite happy to swear, but in the day and age of this story here and the sector of society that the ladies are from, that was not a done thing, so he's remembered just in time not to. "Boots be..." The doctor remembered the ladies were present just in time. "Let the creature slide all she wants to. She ought to be in the open air all the time. She ought," the doctor stared at Elizabeth ferociously, "she ought to sleep out of doors." Elizabeth trembled lest the doctor should go on to insist on this unheard-of proceeding. She knew he had absurd ideas about the proper treatment of consumptives and those who might become such. Consumptives are people who have consumption, also known today as tuberculosis or TB. It's a disease that affects the lungs, and the more people could have fresh air, and back in the days when they couldn't actually cure it, the longer they lived and the healthier they were while they had it. She was glad to appease him by letting Emily stay out of doors in daytime and do what seemed good to her, if only he would say no more about staying out all night too, because her father had died of it, I think. "He is much more concerned about Emily than he is about his own child," she said bitterly to Laura. "Ilse is too healthy," said Aunt Laura with a smile. If she were a delicate child, Alan might forgive her for being her mother's daughter. "Shh," said Aunt Elizabeth, but she shhed too late. Emily, coming into the kitchen, had heard Aunt Laura and puzzled over what she had said all day in school. Why had Ilse to be forgiven for being her mother's daughter? Everybody was her mother's daughter, wasn't she? Wherein did the crime consist? Emily worried over it so much that she was inattentive to her lessons, and Miss Brownell raked her fore and aft with sarcasm. Miss Brownell's a piece of work. It is time we got back to Blairwater, where Teddy was just bringing Emily in from a glorious spin clear round the great circle of ice. Ilse was waiting for her turn on the bank. Her golden cloud of hair aureoled her face. That means it was like a big halo, and fell in a shimmering wave over her forehead under the faded little red tam that she wore. Ilse's clothes were always faded. The stinging kiss of wind had crimsoned her cheeks, and her eyes were glowing like amber pools with fire in their hearts. Teddy's artistic perception... Sorry, I was seeing something out of the corner of my eye, and it's distracting me. I don't want to get tickled by it. Teddy's artistic perception saw her beauty and rejoiced in it. "Isn't Ilse handsome?" he said. Emily was not jealous. It never hurt her to hear Ilse praised, but somehow she did not like this. Teddy was looking at Ilse altogether too admiringly. It was all, Emily believed, due to that shimmering fringe on Ilse's white brows. Emily really wants to get her hair cut in a fringe across the front. And she thinks that the reason she does not look classically beautiful is because she doesn't have a fringe. She hasn't stopped to think this through properly. She's just heart set on having her hair cut in what she calls a bang, a fringe. "If I had a bang, Teddy might think me handsome too," she thought resentfully. "Of course, black hair isn't as pretty as gold, but my forehead is too high. Everybody says so, and I did look nice in Teddy's picture because he drew some curls over it." The matter rankled. Emily thought of it as she went home over the sheen of the crusted snowfield, slanting to the light of the winter sunset, and she could not eat her supper because she did not have a bang. All her long hidden yearning for a bang seemed to come to a head at once. She knew there was no use in coaxing Aunt Elizabeth for one. But when she was getting ready for bed that night, she stood on a chair so that she could see little Emily in the glass, then lifted the curling ends of her long braid and laid them over her forehead. The effect, in Emily's eyes at least, was very alluring. She suddenly thought, what if she cut a bang herself? It would take only a minute, and once done, what could Aunt Elizabeth do? She would be very angry and doubtless inflict some kind of punishment, but the bang would be there, at least until it grew out long. Emily, her lips set, went for the scissors. She unbraided her hair and parted the front tresses. Snip, snip, went the scissors. Glistening locks fell at her feet. In a minute, Emily had her long-desired bang. Straight across her brows fell the lustrous, softly curving fringe. It changed the whole character of her face. It made it arch, provocative, elusive. For one brief moment, Emily gazed at her reflection in triumph, and then sheer terror seized her. Oh, what had she done? How angry Aunt Elizabeth would be! Conscience suddenly awoke and added its pang also. She had been wicked. It was wicked to cut a bang when Aunt Elizabeth had forbidden it. Aunt Elizabeth had given her a home at New Moon. Hadn't Rhoda Stewart that very day in school twitted her again with living on charity? And she was repaying her by disobedience and ingratitude. A star should not have done that. In a panic of fear and remorse, Emily snatched the scissors and cut the bang off. Cut it close against the hairline. Worse and worse. Emily beheld the result in dismay. Anyone could see that a bang had been cut, so Aunt Elizabeth's anger was still to face. She had made a terrible fright of herself. Emily burst into tears, snatched up the fallen locks and crammed them into the wastebasket, blew out her candle and sprang into bed, just as Aunt Elizabeth came in. Emily burrowed her face downwards in the pillows and pretended to be asleep. She was afraid Aunt Elizabeth would ask her some question and insist on her looking up while she answered it. That was a Murray tradition. You looked people in the face when you spoke to them. But Aunt Elizabeth undressed in silence and came to bed. This is the day and age when it was common for people to share beds, because beds were very, very expensive, and also houses were not heated except for maybe a fireplace. And so I don't know if you remember reading Little House on the Prairie. The girls shared a bed together. That was normal in that day and age. So there you go. Aunt Elizabeth undressed in silence and came to bed. The room was in darkness, thick darkness. Emily sighed and turned over. There was a hot gin jar in the bed, she knew, and her feet were cold, but she did not think she ought to have the privilege of the gin jar. She was too wicked, too ungrateful. "Do stop squirming," said Aunt Elizabeth. Emily squirmed no more, physically at least. Mentally, she continued to squirm. She could not sleep. Her feet or her conscience, or both, kept her awake. And fear also. She dreaded the morning. Aunt Elizabeth would see then what had happened. If it were only over, if the revelation were only over. Emily forgot and squirmed. "What makes you so restless tonight?" demanded Aunt Elizabeth in high displeasure. "Are you taking a cold?" "No, ma'am." "Then go to sleep. I can't bear such wriggling. One might as well have an eel in bed. Ow!" Aunt Elizabeth, in squirming a bit herself, had put her own foot against Emily's icy ones. "Goodness, child, your feet are like snow. Here, put them on the gin jar." Aunt Elizabeth pushed the gin jar over against Emily's feet. How lovely and warm and comfortable it was. Emily worked her toes against it like a cat, but she suddenly knew she could not wait for morning. "Aunt Elizabeth, I've got something to confess." Aunt Elizabeth was tired and sleepy and did not want confessions just then. In no very gracious tone she said, "What have you been doing?" I cut a bang, Aunt Elizabeth." "A bang?" Aunt Elizabeth sat up in bed. "But I cut it off again," cried Emily hurriedly. "Right off, close to my head." Aunt Elizabeth got out of the bed, lit a candle, and looked Emily over. "Well, you have made a sight of yourself," she said grimly. "I never saw anyone as ugly as you are this minute, and you have behaved in a most underhand fashion." This was one of the times Emily felt compelled to agree with Aunt Elizabeth. "I'm so sorry," she said, lifting pleading eyes. "You will eat your supper in the pantry for a week," said Aunt Elizabeth, "and you will not go to Uncle Oliver's next week when I go. I had promised to take you, but I shall take no one who looks as you do anywhere with me." This was hard. Emily had looked forward to the visit to Uncle Oliver's, but on the whole she was relieved. The worst was over, and her feet were getting warm, but there was one thing yet. She might as well unburden her heart completely while she was at it. "There's another thing I feel I ought to tell you." Aunt Elizabeth got into bed again with a grunt. Emily took it for permission. "Aunt Elizabeth, you remember that book I found in Dr. Burnley's bookcase and brought home and asked you if I could read it? It was called The History of Henry Esmond. You looked at it and said you had no objections to my reading history, so I read it. But Aunt Elizabeth, it wasn't history, it was a novel, and I knew it when I brought it home." "You know that I have forbidden you to read novels, Emily Starr. They are wicked books and have ruined many souls." "It was very dull," pleaded Emily, as if dullness and wickedness were quite incompatible. "And it made me feel unhappy. Everybody seemed to be in love with the wrong person. I have made up my mind, Aunt Elizabeth, that I will never fall in love. It makes too much trouble." "Don't talk of things you can't understand, and that are not fit for children to think about. This is the result of reading novels. I shall tell Dr. Burnley to lock his bookcase up." "Oh, don't do that, Aunt Elizabeth," exclaimed Emily. "There are no more novels in it, but I'm reading such an interesting book over there. It tells about everything that's inside of you. I've got as far along as the liver and its diseases. The pictures are so interesting. Please let me finish it." This was worse than novels. Aunt Elizabeth was truly horrified. Things that were inside of you were not to be read about. "Have you no shame, Emily Starr? If you have not, I am ashamed for you. Little girls do not read books like that." "But Aunt Elizabeth, why not? I have a liver, haven't I? And heart, and lungs, and stomach, and—" "That will do, Emily. Not another word." Emily went to sleep unhappily. She wished she had never said a word about Esmond, and she knew she would never have a chance to finish that other fascinating book. Nor had she. Dr. Burnley's bookcase was locked thereafter, and the doctor gruffly ordered her and Ilse to keep out of his office. He was in a very bad humour about it, for he had words with Elizabeth Murray over the matter. Emily was not allowed to forget her bang. She was twitted and teased in school about it, and Aunt Elizabeth looked at it whenever she looked at Emily, and the contempt in her eyes burned Emily like a flame. Nevertheless, as the mistreated hair grew out and began to curl in soft little ringlets, Emily found consolation. The bang was tacitly permitted, and she felt that her looks were greatly improved thereby. Of course, as soon as it grew long enough, she knew Aunt Elizabeth would make her brush it back, but for the time being she took comfort in her added beauty. The bang was just about at its best when the letter came from Great-Aunt Nancy. It was written to Aunt Laura. Great-Aunt Nancy and Aunt Elizabeth were not over fond of each other, and in it Great-Aunt Nancy said, "If you have a photograph of that child, Emily, send it along. I don't want to see her. She's stupid. I know she's stupid." I think they mean Aunt Elizabeth. "Also, the child of that fascinating young man, Douglas Starr. He was fascinating. What fools you all were to make such a fuss about Juliet running away with him. If you and Elizabeth had both run away with somebody in your running days, it would have been better for you." This letter was not shown to Emily. Aunt Elizabeth and Aunt Laura had a long secret consultation, and then Emily was told that she was to be taken to Shrewsbury to have a picture taken for Aunt Laura. No, for Aunt Nancy. Emily was much excited over this. She was dressed in her blue cashmere, and Aunt Laura put a point lace collar on it and hung her Venetian beads over it. And new buttoned boots were got for the occasion. Goodness, that's really getting dressed up. "I'm so glad this happened while I still have my bang," Emily thought happily. But in the photographer's dressing room, Aunt Elizabeth grimly proceeded to brush back her bang and pin it with hairpins. "Oh, please, Aunt Elizabeth, let me have it down," Emily begged, "just for the picture. After this I'll brush it back." Aunt Elizabeth was inexorable. The bang was brushed back and the photograph taken. When Aunt Elizabeth saw the finished result, she was satisfied. "She looks sulky, but she is neat, and there is a resemblance to the Murrays I never noticed before," she told Aunt Laura. I wonder if that's because she looks sulky. "That will please Aunt Nancy. She is very clannish under all her oddness." Emily would have liked to throw every one of the photographs in the fire. She hated them. They made her look hideous. Her face seemed to be all forehead. If they sent Aunt Nancy that, Aunt Nancy would think her stupider than ever. When Aunt Elizabeth did the photograph up in cardboard and told Emily to take it to the office, Emily already knew what she meant to do. She went straight to the garret and took out of her box the watercolour Teddy had made of her. It was just the same size as the photograph. Emily removed the latter from its wrappings, spurning it aside with her foot. "That isn't me," she said. "I look sulky because I felt sulky about the bang, but I hardly ever look sulky, so it isn't fair." She wrapped Teddy's sketch up in the cardboard and then sat down and wrote a letter. "Dear Great-Aunt Nancy, Aunt Elizabeth had my picture taken to send you, but I don't like it because it makes me look too ugly, and I am putting another picture in instead. An artist friend made it for me. It is just like me when I am smiling and have a bang. I am only lending it to you, not giving it, because I value it very highly. Your obedient grandniece, Emily Bird Starr. P.S. I'm not so stupid as you think. EBS. P.S. number 2. I am not stupid at all." Emily put her letter in with the picture, thereby unconsciously cheating the post office, and slipped out of the house to mail it. Once it was safely in the post office, she drew a breath of relief. She found the walk home very enjoyable. It was a bland day in early April, and spring was looking at you round the corner. The Wind Woman was laughing and whistling over the wet, sweet fields. Freebooting crows held conferences in the treetops. Little pools of sunshine lay in the mossy hollows. The sea was a blaze of sapphire beyond the golden dunes. The maples in Lofty John's bush were talking about red buds. Everything Emily had ever read of dream and myth and legend seemed a part of the charm of that bush. She was filled to her fingertips with a rapture of living. "Oh, I smell spring," she cried as she danced along the brook path. Then she began to compose a poem on it. Everybody who has ever lived in the world and could string two rhymes together has written a poem on spring. It is the most berhymed subject in the world, and always will be, because it is poetry incarnate itself. You can never be a real poet if you haven't made at least one poem about spring. Emily was wondering whether she would have elves dancing on the brookside by moonlight, or pixies sleeping in a bed of ferns in her poem, when something confronted her at a bend in the path, which was neither elf nor pixie, but seemed odd and weird enough to belong to some of the tribes of little people. Was it a witch, or an elderly fae of evil intentions, the bad fairy of all christening tales? "I'm the boy's Aunt Tom," said the appearance, seeing that Emily was too amazed to do anything but stand and stare. "Remember the boy who works for them?" "Oh," said Emily Emily gasped in relief. She was no longer frightened, but what a very peculiar-looking Lady Perry's Aunt Tom was. Old, so old that it seemed quite impossible that she could ever have been young. A bright red hood over crone-like, fluttering grey locks. A little face seamed by 1,000 lines. Criss-cross wrinkles, a long nose with a knob on the end of it, little twinkling, eager grey eyes under bristly brows, a ragged man's coat covering her from neck to feet, a basket in one hand and a black knobby stick in the other. "Staring wasn't thought good breeding in my time," said Aunt Tom. "Oh," said Emily again. "Excuse me, how do you do?" she added with a vague grasp after her manners. "Polite and not too proud," said Aunt Tom, peering cautiously at her. "I've been up to the big house with a pair of socks for the boy, but 'twas yourself I wanted to see." "Me?" said Emily blankly. "Yes, the boy has been talking a bit of you, and a plan came into my head. Thinks I to myself, it's no bad notion, but I'll make sure before I waste my bit of money. Emily Birdstar is your name, and Murray is your nature. If I give the boy an education, will ye marry him when ye grow up?" "Me?" said Emily again. It seemed to be all she could say. Was she dreaming? She must be. "Yes, you're half Murray. And it'll be a great step up for the boy. He's smart. He'll be a rich man some day and boss the country. But divil a cent will I spend on him unless you promise." "Aunt Elizabeth wouldn't let me," cried Emily, too frightened of this odd old body to refuse on her own account. "If you've got any Murray in you, you'll do your own choosing," said Aunt Tom, thrusting her face so close to Emily's that her bushy eyebrows tickled Emily's nose. "Say you'll marry the boy and to college he goes." Emily seemed to be rendered speechless. She could think of nothing to say. Oh, if she could only wake up. She could not even run. "Say it," insisted Aunt Tom, thumping her stick sharply on a stone in the path. Emily was so horrified that she might have said something, anything, to escape. But at this moment Perry bounded up out of the spruce copse, his face white with rage, and seized his Aunt Tom most disrespectfully by the shoulder. "You go home," he said furiously. "Now, boy dear," quavered Aunt Tom deprecatingly, "I was only trying to do you a good turn. I was asking her to marry you after a bit." "I'll do my own asking." Perry was angrier than ever. You've likely spoiled everything. Go home, I say." Aunt Tom hobbled off, muttering. "Then I'll know better than to waste my bit of money. No, Murray, no money, me boy." When she disappeared down the brook path, Perry turned to Emily. From white, he had gone very red. "Don't mind her, she's cracked," he said. "Of course when I grow up I mean to ask you to marry me, but I couldn't. Aunt Elizabeth—" "Oh, she will then. I'm going to be Premier of Canada some day. But I wouldn't want—I'm sure I wouldn't—" "You will when you grow up. Ilsa's better looking, of course, and I don't know why I like you best, but I do." "Don't you ever talk to me like this again," commanded Emily, beginning to recover her dignity. "Oh, I won't, not till we grow up. I'm as ashamed of it as you are," said Perry with a sheepish grin, "only I had to say something after Aunt Tom butted in like that. I ain't to blame for it, so don't you hold it against me, but just you remember that I'm going to ask you some day, and I believe Teddy Kent is too." Emily was walking haughtily away, but she turned at this to say coolly over her shoulder, "If he does, I'll marry him." "If you do, I'll knock his head off," shouted Perry in a prompt rage. But Emily walked steadily on home and went to the garret to think things over. "It has been romantic, but not comfortable," was her conclusion, and that particular poem on spring was never finished. And that's the end of the chapter, and time for something to drink and something to eat. There you go. I'm using that because it's less likely for me to pour it over myself, which I have a tendency to do with the water bottle. I like the little water bottle, but it's just long and thin, and I have been known to misjudge when I'm watching the screen when I'm trying to have a drink of water at the same time. So what have you been up to this week? Have you had anything exciting happen? Not even this week, this month. Don't forget, if you want me to know that you're here, but you're not actually going to be chatting directly with me, you can always type in !lurk, L-U-R-K, no spaces, no capitals, and it will just let me know, and then I can say hi to you because I know you're there. Just one way of doing it. Not that you have to, but just it's a possibility. Cheese. I'm guessing that my microphone is picking up every little sound I make when I'm eating and drinking. Sorry about that. Maybe we could do some food-based ASMR. Do I have some of my snack log? Very rattly. I just stopped for a minute there to see if it was me eating that was the noise. I think part of it's actually just the wind in the chimney. It seems to work quite well as a pick-up, this microphone. So one of the things I'm planning on doing is actually drawing up some emotes that can be used in the chat. And Twitch has been very generous these days, and they've made it so that you can actually have emotes for followers as well as having ones for subscribers. It used to be just subscribers that could use customized emotes, but now they've actually got it so followers can too, and you do a different selection for followers too. Subscribers can use follower ones as well. But the options are a lot broader. So I just need to actually figure out what I'm going to do for emotes. so I can add them to, so I can create them and then add them to my server. So what do you think? My channel, sorry. So what do you think? Any particular requests for what emotes to do? Right. One last drink of water and then I'll read the next chapter, which is chapter 22. Right. Carrying on. Emily of New Moon by L.M. Montgomery. We are reading chapter 22, Wyther, Grange, Wyther, Grange. Could be Wyther, but I'm going to say it as Wyther. No reply or acknowledgement came from Great-aunt Nancy Priest regarding Emily's picture. Aunt Elizabeth and Aunt Laura, knowing Great-aunt Nancy's ways tolerably well, were not surprised at this, but Emily felt rather worried over it. Perhaps Great-aunt Nancy did not approve of what she had done, or perhaps she still thought her too stupid to bother with. Yes, she got the impression that Emily was stupid because Emily was overwhelmed at the time that she first met her, and so hadn't answered in a normal conventional manner, and so Great-aunt Nancy had thought that she was daft, basically. I'm just checking the back of my microphone. It's all right. I just had to when I thought that I was going to have to go somewhere else for my Zoom meeting, I had packed up my microphone and everything else, and I was just checking that I hadn't actually bumped the switch on the back of it, which changes some of the sound settings. But it's okay. So we'll carry on and find out what happened here. Wyther, Grange. She wrote, Emily did not, but perhaps she still... I'm trying to decide where to get started again from. Perhaps Great-aunt Nancy did not approve of what she had done, or perhaps she still thought her too stupid to bother with. Emily did not like to lie under the imputation of stupidity. She wrote a scathing epistle to Great-aunt Nancy on a letter bill in which she did not mince her opinions as to that ancient lady's knowledge of the rules of epistolary etiquette of writing letters. The letter was folded up and stowed away on the little shelf under the sofa, but it served its purpose in blowing off steam, and Emily had ceased to think about the matter when a letter came from Great-aunt Nancy in July. This is summer now. Elizabeth and Laura talked the matter over in the cookhouse, forgetful or ignorant of the fact that Emily was sitting on the kitchen doorstep just outside. So the cookhouse is separate to the main house. The kitchen is inside the house. The cookhouse is just out of the house to keep rats and smells and all sorts of things separate from the house. Also to reduce fire risk. Anyway, carrying on. They were ignorant or forgetful of the fact that Emily was sitting on the kitchen doorstep just outside. Emily was imagining herself attending a drawing room of Queen Victoria, robed in white, with ostrich plumes, veil, and court train. She had just bent to kiss the Queen's hand when Aunt Elizabeth's voice shattered her dream as a pebble thrown into a pool scatters the fairy reflection. "What is your opinion, Laura?" Aunt Elizabeth was saying, "of letting Emily visit Aunt Nancy?" Emily pricked up her ears. What was in the wind now? "From her letter she seems very anxious to have the child," said Laura. Elizabeth sniffed. A whim. You know what her whims are like. Likely by the time Emily got there she'd be quite over it and have no use for her." "Yes, but on the other hand, if we don't let her go, she will be dreadfully offended and never forgive us. Or Emily. Emily should have her chance." "I don't know that her chance is worth much. If Aunt Nancy really has any money beyond her annuity, and that's what neither you nor I nor any living soul knows, unless it's Caroline, she'll likely leave it all to some of the priests. Leslie Priest's a favourite of hers, I understand. Aunt Nancy always liked her husband's family better than her own, even though she's always slurring at them. Still, She might take a fancy to Emily. They're both so odd that they might suit each other, but you know the way she talks. She and that abominable old Caroline." "Emily is too young to understand," said Aunt Laura. "I understand more than you think," cried Emily indignantly. Aunt Elizabeth jerked open the cookhouse door. "Emily Starr, haven't you learned by this time not to listen?" "I wasn't listening. I thought you knew I was sitting here. I can't help my ears hearing. Why didn't you whisper? When you whisper, I know you're talking secrets and I don't try to hear them. Am I going to Great Aunt Nancy's for a visit?" "We haven't decided," said Aunt Elizabeth coldly, and that was all the satisfaction Emily got for a week. She hardly knew herself whether she wanted to go or not. Aunt Elizabeth had been making cheese. New Moon was noted for its cheeses, and Emily found the whole process absorbing, from the time the rennet was put in the warm new milk, till the white curds were packed away in the hoop and put under the press in the old orchard with the big round grey cheese stone to weigh it down as it had weighed down New Moon cheeses for 100 years. Then she and Ilse and Teddy and Perry were absorbed heart and soul in playing out the Midsummer Night's Dream in Lofty John's bush, and it was all very fascinating. When they entered Lofty John's bush, they went out of the realm of daylight and things known into the realm of twilight and mystery and enchantment. Teddy had painted wonderful scenery on old boards and pieces of sails which Perry had got at the harbour. Ilse had fashioned delightful fairy wings from tissue paper and tinsel, and Perry had made an ass's head for Bottom out of an old calf skin that was very realistic. Bottom is the name of the ass, the donkey, in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Emily had toiled happily for many weeks, copying out the different parts and adapting them to circumstances. She had cut the play after a fashion that would have harrowed Shakespeare's soul, but after all the result was quite pretty and coherent. It did not worry them that 4 small actors had to take 6 times as many parts. Emily was Titania and Hermia, and a job lot of fairies besides. Ilse was Hippolyta and Helena, plus some more fairies, and the boys were anything that the dialogue required. Aunt Elizabeth knew nothing of it all. She would promptly have put a stop to the whole thing, for she thought play acting exceedingly wicked. But Aunt Laura was privy to the plot, and Cousin Jimmy and Lofty John had already attended a moonlight rehearsal. To go away and leave all this, even for a time, would be a hard wrench. But on the other hand, Emily had a burning curiosity to see Great Aunt Nancy and Wyther Grange, her quaint old house at Priest Pond, with the famous stone dogs on the gate-posts. On the whole, she thought she would like to go, and when she saw Aunt Laura doing up her starched white petticoats, and Aunt Elizabeth grimly dusting off a small black nail-studded trunk in the garret, she knew, before she was told, that the visit to Priest Pond was going to come off. So she took out the letter she had written to Aunt Nancy and added an apologetic postscript. Ilse chose to be disgruntled because Emily was going for a visit. In reality, Ilse felt appalled at the lonely prospect of a month or more without her inseparable chum. No more jolly evenings of play-acting in Lofty John's bush, no more pungent quarrels. Besides, Ilse herself had never been anywhere for a visit in her whole life, and she felt sore over this fact. "I wouldn't go to Wyther Grange for anything," said Ilse. "It's haunted." "'Tisn't." "Yes, it's haunted by a ghost. You can feel and hear, but never see." "Oh, I wouldn't be you for the world. Your Great Aunt Nancy is an awful crank, and the old woman who lives with her is a witch. She'll put a spell on you. You'll pine away and die." "I won't. She isn't," said Emily. "Is? Why, she makes the stone dogs on the gate-posts howl every night if anyone comes near the place. They go, woo, woo." Ilse was not a born elocutionist for nothing. Her woo was extremely gruesome, but it was daylight, and Emily was as brave as a lion in daylight. "You're jealous," she said, and walked off. I'm not, you blithering centipede, Ilse yelled after her, putting on airs because your aunt has stone dogs on her gateposts. Why, I know a woman in Shrewsbury who has dogs on her posts that are 10 times stonier than your aunt's. But next morning, Ilse was over to bid Emily goodbye and entreat her to write every week. Emily was going to drive to Priest Pond with old Kelly. Aunt Elizabeth was to have driven her, but Aunt Elizabeth was not feeling well that day and Aunt Laura could not leave her. Cousin Jimmy had to work at the hay. It looked as if she could not go, and this was rather serious, for Aunt Nancy had been told to expect her that day, and Aunt Nancy did not like to be disappointed. If Emily did not turn up at Priest Pond on the day set, Great Aunt Nancy was quite capable of shutting the door in her face when she did appear and telling her to go back home. Nothing less than this conviction would have induced Aunt Elizabeth to fall in with old Kelly's suggestion that Emily should ride to Priest Pond with him. His home was on the other side of it, and he was going straight there. Emily was quite delighted. She liked old Kelly and thought that a drive on his fine red wagon would be quite an adventure. Sorry, I've just got something flashing at me here and I'm wondering why. No idea. I'm going to carry on in a moment. I was just distracted by a technical thing. It's a technical word, you know, thing. No idea. Right, I'll carry on. I'm trying to find the right place now. Emily was quite delighted. She liked old Kelly and thought that a drive on his fine red wagon would be quite an adventure. Her little black box was hoisted to the roof and tied there, and they went clinking and glittering down the New Moon Lane in fine style. The tins in the boughs of the wagon behind them rumbled like a young earthquake. "Get up, my nag, get up," said old Kelly. "Sure, and I've always liked to drive the pretty girls. And when is the wedding to be?" "Whose wedding?" "The slyness of her. Your own, of course." "I have no intention of getting married immediately," said Emily in a very good imitation of Aunt Elizabeth's tone and manner. "Sure, and you're a chip off the old block. Miss Elizabeth couldn't have said it better. Get up, me nag, get up." "I only meant," said Emily, fearing that she had insulted old Kelly, "that I am too young to be married." "The younger the better. The less mischief you'll you'll be after working with them come-hither eyes. Get up, me nag, get up. The baste is tired, so we'll let him go at his own swate will. Here's a bag of sweeties for you. Old Kelly always treats the ladies. Come now, tell me all about him." About who? But Emily knew quite well. "Your beau, of course." "I haven't any beau, Mr. Kelly. I wish you wouldn't talk to me about such things." "Sure, and I won't if 'tis a sore subject. Don't ye be minding if ye haven't got one. There'll be scads of him after a while, and if the right one doesn't know what's good for him, just ye come to old Kelly and get some toad ointment." Toad ointment? That sounded horrible. Emily shivered, but she would rather talk about toad ointment than beaux. "What is that for?" "It's a love charm," said old Kelly mysteriously. "Put a little smooch on his eyelids, and he'll yearn for life. And he's yearn for life, with never a squint at any other girl." "Doesn't sound very nice," said Emily. "How do you make it?" "You boil 4 toads alive till they're good and soft, and then mash—" "Oh, stop, implored Emily, putting her hands over her ears. "I don't want to hear any more. You couldn't be so cruel." "Cruel, is it? You were after eating lobsters this day that were boiled alive." "I don't believe it, I don't. If it's true, I'll never eat one again. Oh, Mr. Kelly, I thought you were a nice, kind man, but those poor toads." Girl dear, it was only me joke, and you won't be needing toad ointment to win your lad's love. Wait you now, I've something in the till behind me for a present for ye. Old Kelly fished out a box which he put into Emily's lap. She found a dainty little hairbrush in it. Look at the back of it, said old Kelly. You'll see something handsome, all the love charm you'll ever need. Emily turned it over. Her own face looked back at her from a little inset mirror surrounded by a scroll of painted roses. "Oh, Mr. Kelly, how pretty! I mean the roses in the glass," she cried. "Is it really for me?" "Oh, thank you, thank you! Now I can have Emily in the glass whenever I want her. Why, I can carry her round with me. And you were really only in fun about the toads?" "Of course. Get up, my nag, get up. And so you're to visit the old lady over at Priest Pond. Ever been there?" "No." "It's full of priests. You can't throw a stone but ye hit one, and hit one, hit all. They're as proud and as lofty as the Murrays themselves. The only one I know is Adam Priest. The others hold too high. He's the black sheep, and quite sociable. But if you want to know how the world looked on the morning after the flood, go into his barnyard on a rainy day. Look a here, girl dear." Old Kelly lowered his voice mysteriously. "Don't ye ever marry a priest?" "Why not?" asked Emily, who had never thought of marrying a priest, but was immediately curious as to why she shouldn't. Keep in mind that priest is the surname of the family, not somebody who is a priest of a church in this situation. "They're ill to marry, ill to live with. The wives die young. The old lady of the Grange fought her man out and buried him, but she had the Murray look. I wouldn't trust it too far. The only decent priest among them is the one they call Jarback Priest, and he's too old for you." "Why do they call him Jarback?" "One of his shoulders is a little bit higher than the other. He's got a bit of money and doesn't be after having to work. A bookworm, I'm believing. Have ye got a bit of cold iron about you?" "No, why?" "Ye should have. Old Caroline Priest at the Grange is a witch, if ever there was one." "Why, that's what Ilse said. But there are no such things as witches, really, Mr. Kelly." "Maybe that's true, but it's better to be on the safe side. Here, put this horseshoe nail in your pocket, and don't cross her if you can help it. You don't mind if I have a bit of a smoke, do you?" Emily did not mind at all. It left her free to follow her own thoughts, which were more agreeable than old Kelly's talk of toads and witches. The road from Blairwater to Priest Pond was a very lovely one, winding along the Gulf shore, crossing fir-fringed rivers and inlets, and coming ever and anon on one of the ponds for which that part of the North Shore was noted. Blairwater, Derry Pond, Long Pond, 3 ponds, with 3 little blue lakelets, were strung together like 3 great sapphires held by a silver thread, and then Priest Pond, the largest of them all, almost as round as Blairwater. As they drove down towards it, Emily drank the scene in with avid eyes. As soon as possible she must write a description of it. She had packed the Jimmy Blank book in her box for just such purposes. The air seemed to be filled with opal dust over the great pond and the bowery summer homesteads around it. A western sky of smoky red was arched over the big Malvern Bay beyond. Little grey sails were drifting along by the fir-fringed shores. A sequestered side road, fringed thickly with young maples and birches, led down to Wyther Grange. How damp and cool the air was in the hollows, and how the ferns did smell. Emily was sorry when they reached Wyther Grange and climbed in between the gate posts, whereon the big stone dogs sat very stonily, looking grim enough in the twilight. The wide hall door was open, and a flood of light streamed out over the lawn. A little old woman was standing in it, Old Kelly seemed suddenly in something of a hurry. He swung Emily and her box to the ground, shook hands hastily, and whispered, "Don't lose that bit of a nail. Goodbye. I wish ye a cool head and a warm heart," and was off before the little old woman could reach them. "So this is Emily of New Moon," she heard a rather shrill, cracked voice saying. She felt a thin, claw-like hand grasp hers and draw her towards the door. There were no witches, Emily knew, but she thrust her hand into her pocket and touched the horseshoe nail. And guess what? That's the end of the chapter. What's going to happen next? I'm going to stop reading there. The next chapter is called Deals with Ghosts. Intriguing, very intriguing. What is going to happen? So she's going to get to know a little bit more of the family. Are they as strange as everybody makes out? We'll find out, won't we? They're probably going to be as blunt as the Murrays that she already knows. Just because it feels like that. That's sort of people that they seem to be. They seem to take it with them. I'm right, and that is it. Nothing else exists. Anyway. So, that's the end of today's chapter. If you want to catch up on some of the other stories, go over to my YouTube channel and look through my playlists over there and have a listen to something else, just to give you a change of pace. And there's quite a wide variety there. What else? I'll be back on Monday afternoon to read some more from Emily of New Moon for you. I think we're about 3/4 of the way through the book. Maybe slightly more, I'm not sure. But unless there's something else happens or something goes wrong, I will be here reading for you again. And it has been lovely to be able to read for you. I really enjoy it. I hope you've been enjoying it too. Have a think about what other books we can read, because we're going to finish this one sometime and we need to carry on with a different story once we've finished this one. So maybe you can make some suggestions. You're welcome to join my Discord server, and once you've accepted the rules of the server, you're most welcome most welcome, yes, very most welcome, to write in the general chat. I think unless there's a suggestions channel, write in the chat somewhere there suggestions of other books that you might think would be ones that would be good for us to read here. Keep in mind that I prefer them to be old books and public domain, just because then we don't have to worry about whether or not they're actually okay for reading out loud in public. So there you go, and we'll see you next time. In the meantime, happy reading. Bye.